At the time-worn diner, an old man would walk in every day and order only the cheapest thing on the menu. Invisible to almost everyone, he was noticed only by the young waitress, Selina, who secretly offered him a slice of pie and a smile. But one morning, he didn't come back, and days later, 4 black SUVs pulled up in front of the diner. 5 lawyers and 3 security guards stepped out, entered with firm strides, and asked, "Who here is Selina Marquez?" What no one knew was that this story had begun long before. The winter wind blew like invisible blades against the fogged-up windows of the Maple Street diner. The neon sign flickered lazily, as if it too were tired of that endless night. Inside, the air carried the smell of burned coffee mixed with the grease of the fryers. The dim yellow lights trembled slightly, giving the place a weary look, as if even the bulbs shared in the fatigue of that old diner. It was too early for the breakfast rush, and too late for anyone still awake. At the door, an old bell announced the arrival of someone who didn't seem to belong to either category. An elderly man, in a worn-out coat and a faded hat, stepped in slowly. His snow-covered boots left a wet trail on the linoleum floor, already scarred by time. He walked unhurriedly to the farthest corner, the table no one ever wanted to sit at. There, he leaned his cane against the wall and lowered himself onto the seat with a sigh that seemed heavier than his body itself. Jonathan Whitlow, that was the name written on the documents he kept hidden, though no one there knew it. To everyone else, he was just the old man who showed up every day, sat alone, and ordered the cheapest item on the menu. "Coffee and toast," he said in a hoarse voice, almost a whisper. From the other end of the counter, Franklin, the calculating manager, watched him. His thick brows furrowed in disapproval. Muttering something about customers who don't spend, he scribbled a note on his pad, as if every minute that man sat there cost the restaurant money. The young waitress, Selina Marquez, approached with a worn-out notepad, but her smile was genuine even on the coldest shift of the week. Her brown eyes, tired from long hours, still managed to carry warmth. "The usual, Mr. Whitlow?" she asked, already knowing the answer. The old man lifted his eyes for a moment. In them was an ocean of stories, of losses and memories, but no one seemed willing to dive in. No one, except Selina. She brought him steaming coffee and toast. And when Franklin wasn't looking, she discreetly added a small piece of apple pie leftovers from the night before. She slid the plate toward him and winked, as if sharing a secret. Jonathan smiled for the first time that morning. His teeth were worn, but the gesture lit up his wrinkled face in a way Selina would not forget. While other customers hurried by, almost invisible, she lingered for a few moments to talk. She asked about the cold, about how the streets were. He answered in short phrases, yet each word carried the weight of someone who had the world on his shoulders. "You know, child, winter is nothing compared to what I've already lived through," he said, watching the coffee steam rise like a portrait of times long gone. Selina didn't press with questions. She simply stayed there, listening. Sometimes, listening is the greatest gift one can give. She returned to the table with the coffee pot in hand. The old man watched her in silence for a few seconds before speaking, almost hesitantly. "Don't you ever get tired?" "Tired of what?" the waitress asked, pouring more coffee. "Of smiling, even when it looks like you're carrying the whole world on your shoulders." The waitress swallowed hard. She didn't reply right away, only pulled his empty mug closer and filled it once more. But deep down, she felt those words strike her more deeply than she wanted to admit. Back at the counter, Franklin intercepted her. His voice was firm, cold, like the wind blowing outside. "Do you think this diner is a charity, Selina? Every slice of cake costs money. Every table taken is a paying customer we lose." She clutched the key she wore around her neck, a keepsake from her mother who was no longer there. She drew in a steady breath before answering. "Sometimes, Franklin, we lose more when we forget how to be human." The manager huffed and shook his head. But he said nothing more. Selina returned to the tables, pretending all was normal. She knew that if she kept offering small acts of kindness, she would eventually be punished. But there was something about Jonathan that wouldn't let her look away. Something that told her he needed not just coffee and toast, but someone to remind him of his own humanity. What she didn't know was that this fragile old man carried a secret that would change not only her destiny, but the fate of everyone inside that diner. Do you believe small acts of kindness can transform entire destinies? Write yes in the comments if you too believe in the power of kindness. The morning hours dragged slowly at the Maple Street diner. She looked tired, with deep circles under her eyes and a permanent knot in her shoulders. Even so, there was still a firmness in her gaze that time had not managed to erase. She thought of the overdue rent, the electric bill that had arrived with a red warning, and the loneliness of the small apartment waiting for her at the end of her shift. All of it could have hardened her, but inside her lived something that refused to die, the memory of her mother. The simple key that hung from her necklace was all that remained. A worthless object to others, but for Selina, it was the link to the promise she had made at her mother's deathbed: never stop seeing people. As she wiped down a nearby table, she heard the old man's voice behind her. "You know, I once had a key like that too." She turned, surprised. Jonathan was discreetly pointing at the chain around her neck. "A key?" the waitress asked. "Yes. Old, from a wooden chest." But it wasn't the chest that mattered, it was what it held. The old man's mysterious tone stirred Selina's curiosity. She sat down across from him for a moment, breaking the rule of not sitting at a customer's table. "And what was inside?" she dared to ask. Jonathan smiled, but didn't answer right away. He stirred his coffee as if searching for words at the bottom of the cup. "Stories. Sometimes, things are only valuable because they remind us of who we were, or who we've lost." The waitress felt her heart tighten. The memory of her mother surged within her, sharp and painful. "My key, it doesn't open anything. But it reminds me that someone once believed in me," she said softly. The old man looked at her for a long time. There was tenderness, but also a hidden weight in his eyes. "Perhaps one day you'll discover it opens more than you think." The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable. It was a silence full of meaning, the kind that doesn't need words to exist. At the counter, Franklin scrubbed glasses with rough movements, casting disapproving glances. To him, that kind of conversation was nothing but a waste of time. Selina knew it. She knew she would soon be pulled aside and warned yet again. But she couldn't simply walk away. There was something about that man that cried out for attention, something invisible to everyone else, but impossible for her to ignore. That afternoon, when business slowed down, Selina seized the chance to sit beside the old man with a bowl of soup she had prepared in secret. "It's not on the menu, but it'll warm you up," she said, setting the bowl in front of him. Jonathan raised his eyebrows, surprised. "And the manager?" "The manager can wait. Hunger can't." He chuckled softly, a short laugh, but genuine. "You remind me of someone." "Who?" "A young woman I met a long time ago. She had the same courage in her eyes." The waitress felt the melancholy in the air, but didn't press further. She simply adjusted her apron and remained in silence, sharing that moment. When night fell and the cold grew harsher, Selina cleared the last table. The old man was still there, wrapped in his thin coat, hands clasped over his cane. "Are you waiting for someone?" she asked. "No. I don't wait for anything anymore." "Then why do you always come here?" The waitress pressed, smiling. "You could be somewhere more comfortable." "Because here, at least, there are people who still remember that I exist." The words hit her like a silent blow. Selina didn't know how to respond. She simply took his cup, but her eyes shimmered with tears she held back. While closing the register that night, Franklin called Selina aside. "If you keep wasting food and time on that old man, I'll dock it from your paycheck. Isn't it enough you're slowing down service?" Selina clenched her fists but held back her words. She only nodded, swallowing her pride. She knew any direct confrontation could cost her the job, and that was something she couldn't afford to lose. Jonathan was slow to rise that night. He sat there, staring at the relentless snow outside, as if searching for courage to step through the door. Selina noticed his hesitation and approached, worried. "It's too strong out there tonight." "Maybe it's better to wait until the storm passes," the waitress suggested, clutching her tray to her chest. The old man looked at her for a few seconds, and in his eyes was a mixture of resignation and sorrow. Then he spoke, in a voice so faint it made her shiver. "I have nowhere to go." Selina froze. The sound of the blizzard seemed to swallow the entire room, and for a moment the world stopped. He wasn't just talking about the cold night, he was speaking of an entire life of solitude. Her heart raced. She walked back to the counter slowly, but her mind kept pounding. What now? I can't abandon an old man in a snowstorm, but I can't lose my job either. What am I going to do? The diner's silence felt unbearably heavy, as if destiny itself was waiting for her answer. The snowstorm battered the town as if it wanted to devour everything. The streetlights flickered under the wind, and the Maple Street diner's neon sign looked ready to die out. Inside, the silence was broken only by the icy whistle sneaking through the cracks of the door. Selina watched Jonathan in the corner, shivering inside his thin coat. His words still echoed in her mind like a hammer. I have nowhere to go. She drew in a deep breath, bracing herself against the counter. Her heart urged her to act, but reason reminded her that Franklin would never forgive a gesture like that. Between the fear of being punished and the pain of ignoring him, Selina's heart already knew which path to take. She thought about it, feeling her pulse quicken. Every passing minute seemed to weigh a decision on her shoulders. The wind howled louder, and the windows vibrated as if they might shatter at any moment. Selina looked outside and saw the street covered in white, as though the entire town had vanished beneath a frozen sheet. She imagined Jonathan trying to walk with his cane along those invisible sidewalks. The image made her shiver. She walked toward him. Just wait a moment, I'll be right back. In the storage room, she pulled out cardboard boxes, stacked sacks of flour, and spread a piece of tarp on the floor. She found 2 old blankets and rubbed her hands over the fabric, trying to warm them with her own heat. It wasn't much, but it was better than the nothing that awaited him outside. She also grabbed a pot left on the stove. There was still some vegetable soup inside, thin, almost flavorless, but hot. She filled a bowl and added a piece of stale bread. When she returned to the table, Jonathan lifted his tired eyes. You don't have to trouble yourself. Yes, I do. The waitress smiled, trying to hide her worry. Come with me. He hesitated. The old man wasn't used to being treated with care. Selina extended her hand, steady, and waited. Jonathan took it, embarrassed, and rose with difficulty. The small back room was cold and cramped, but sheltered from the wind. Selina helped him lie down on the improvised bedding, covered him carefully, and handed him the bowl. The smell of soup filled the musty air. Jonathan took the first sip. His eyes filled with tears. It's been so long since anyone cared for me like this. Don't say that, the waitress replied, sitting beside him. Everyone deserves care. He looked at her intently. You don't understand. It's not just the soup. It's the gesture. It's the fact that you saw someone the whole world chooses to ignore. Selina swallowed hard. The old man's words struck a deep chord within her. She clutched the key around her neck, remembering her mother. My mother used to say we can't choose everything in life, but we can choose not to close our eyes. I guess that's all I'm trying to do. Jonathan smiled, weary but genuine. Then hold on to that, child. Because it's rarer than gold. While he finished the soup, Selina adjusted the boxes, trying to block the gaps where the icy air seeped through. She watched him for a few moments, until she saw his body relax. The old man closed his eyes and breathed deeply, as if he had finally found rest. Selina rose quietly, adjusted her apron, and walked to the door of the little room. Before leaving, she glanced back. The scene seemed so simple and, at the same time, so grand, a man forgotten by the world, lying on old boxes, finally treated with dignity. In the empty dining room, she turned off some of the lights. The clock already marked past 2 in the morning. Another shift would begin in just a few hours, and she couldn't risk being caught. She stepped back toward the old man, who was already dozing. "I have to go. But I'll be back soon to see how you're doing. You're safe here." She touched his shoulder lightly. Jonathan opened his eyes just enough to see her smile. "Thank you, child. You've given me more than many who had everything." Selina slipped out through the side door. The wind struck her like a frozen wall, but there was warmth in her chest. As she walked to the bus stop, she felt she had risked much, but she also knew she wouldn't have been able to sleep in peace if she had let that man face the storm alone. The next morning, when she returned to work, Selina rushed straight to the back before even putting on her apron. Her heart pounded as if she were about to reunite with a relative. She pushed the door open anxiously, only to find the blankets neatly folded on the boxes and the empty bowl set in the corner. Jonathan was gone. Selina froze, the silence heavier than the cold. The noise of the dining room felt distant, as if the entire world had faded. She clutched her mother's key against her chest and whispered, barely audible, "Where could he have gone?" And in that emptiness, she knew his disappearance wasn't the end of the story, but the beginning of something she could not yet imagine. Where could a man of that age and in that condition possibly go? The next morning was born gray, as if the sky had spent the entire night keeping a secret it refused to reveal. The snow, now piled on the sidewalks, melted slowly into a mixture of dirty water and salt. Inside the Maple Street diner, the hum of the exhaust fan masked the unease, and the coffee, more bitter than usual, seemed to share the same restlessness that lived in Selina's chest. The waitress opened the little back room for the third time in less than half an hour. Folded blankets, empty bowl, boxes in the same place. No note. No trace of the old man. It was as if the night had swallowed Jonathan Whitlow and, before dawn, spat out nothing but silence. Selina touched the necklace, feeling the cold metal of the key against her skin. The promise to her mother returned like a stubborn prayer: never close your eyes. Never deny help. She drew a deep breath, crossed the dining room, and threw herself back into work. Plates, orders, change, coffee. One step at a time, so she wouldn't break. But the emptiness was there, insistent. It wasn't just the old man's disappearance, it was the feeling of losing someone from the family without even having the right to call him that. Jonathan had become, without asking permission, a presence that filled the space between one order and the next, between one weariness and another. Now, only an empty corner remained, and too many questions. At the end of her shift, she grabbed her coat and stepped outside. The city breathed chimney smoke and wet asphalt. Selina walked one block, then another, then 2 more. She spoke with a recycler stuffing cans into a bag, with the grocery store owner on the corner, with the bus driver on Route 12. "Have you seen a thin old man, worn coat, cane?" she asked, describing him as if sketching his portrait in the air. "Not today." "Maybe he went to the Jefferson shelter," the driver replied, already closing the doors. The waitress thanked him and hurried off, the key bouncing against her chest in rhythm with her heartbeat. The Jefferson shelter was always crowded when the temperature dropped. At the entrance, the smell of soup and damp blankets mingled with the stories no one asked about. Selina went straight to the receptionist. "I'm trying to find a friend. He's elderly, uses a cane. His name is," she hesitated, "Jonathan Whitlow." A name she only knew because sometimes the old man betrayed himself in fragments of speech. "Jonathan." The young woman at the desk checked a list and shook her head. "We've had 2 Jonathans this week, but none with a cane. Not today." Selina thanked her, insisting on describing the coat, the voice, the way he looked. "Nothing." She turned back and kept going. She passed by the Maple Community Center, the improvised shelter in a church basement, the narrow alley behind the old cinema where forgotten souls sometimes tried to hide from the wind. The old man seemed to have dissolved into the city. On her way back, night fell with a heavy, dark blue weight over the shop windows. The Maple Street diner shone like a beacon of light in a sea of slippery sidewalks. Selina walked in and traded her coat for her apron. She said nothing. She didn't need to. Her silence already spoke what Franklin pretended not to notice. "Forget it," Selina grumbled the manager. "People like that come and go every day. If you try to carry each one on your shoulders, you won't have any strength left to work." She didn't answer. There was no point teaching someone who didn't want to learn. Instead, she resumed her rounds between tables, cleared plates, filled mugs. The waitress moved as if dancing a choreography she had learned to survive, smiling without promising, listening without collapsing, caring without asking permission. On her break, she sat in the back of the dining room with a glass of water. She looked at the key. Sometimes, she imagined it would open a door she didn't yet know, not of wood, but inside herself. Never close your eyes. Never deny help. She repeated it like someone tuning the strings of the heart from within. "Still looking for your magic grandpa?" Franklin sneered, walking past with a dish towel on his shoulder. "If it's any comfort, at least now no table is being taken up for free." "You call it waste." "I call it humanity," Selina replied. "What keeps me employed is profit." "The rest is poetry," the manager shot back, disappearing into the kitchen. Selina swallowed her reply. What she really wanted to scream was that profit doesn't warm a soul, and sometimes poetry is what keeps a life from collapsing. But she knew the measure of her own breath, words had to be saved for the right hours. The days dragged on in small, cruel steps. Winter loosened its grip slightly, but the wind still cut sharp. The waitress carried on the only way she knew how, long shifts, meager tips, bills bigger than her hope. When she had $1 left over, she bought bread and placed it on a side shelf in the back room, a gesture that became habit, almost ritual, as if the old man might walk through the door at any moment and smile back at her. Sometimes, when a table sat empty, she glanced at Jonathan's favorite corner and imagined the discreet sound of his cane tapping the floor. Other times, she was sure she had seen his worn coat crossing the street, but it was only a stranger. The world had the cruel gift of resembling what we had lost. On a Tuesday evening, the snow began again. Lighter, less aggressive, but stubborn enough to cover the step at the entrance. Selina swept the doorway, chased away the ice, and the old bell jingled as a couple hurried out, wrapped in scarves. The dining room grew quieter. The neon light cast slanted shadows across the empty tables, and the lamps, with their weary yellow glow, seemed to doze. She was restocking napkins when the memory of the old man came flooding back, the way he held the mug, the way he said thank you as if apologizing, the long pause before he smiled. Family is who we decide not to lose, she thought, and the thought caught her off guard. As if love were, in the end, nothing more than an exercise in persistence. The clock read 9:17 p.m. Selina heard the growl of powerful engines outside, cutting through the air with the authority of those who never need to yield. It wasn't the noise of a bus, nor a delivery truck. It was something else, low, controlled, like vehicles that had been trained to move without stirring dust. She turned toward the window. Headlights sliced through the snow in white beams. 1, 2, 3, 4 black vehicles pulled up in sequence in front of the diner, lined up as though drawing a boundary across the pavement. The neon flickered, perhaps in fear, perhaps in respect. The door opened with the sharp jingle of the bell. The cold wind entered first, then the dark coats, polished shoes, pale hands of men unaccustomed to the street. 5 lawyers crossed the dining room in a line, discreet folders in hand, followed by 3 security guards whose presence filled every remaining space between the tables. Everything about them was silent, their steps, their glances, their gestures. Franklin straightened behind the counter, wavering between the urge to look important and the fear of having to serve important people. Selina, instinctively, stepped back, unsure whether to fix her apron or hold her breath. The first lawyer stopped at the center of the dining room, scanning the place with a brief, precise turn of his head. Then, as if the entire world could be contained in a single question, he lifted his face and, in a firm voice, said, "Who here is Selina Marquez?" The question cut through the air like a sentence. And, without knowing it, she was about to uncover the most improbable secret of her life. The silence that fell over the Maple Street diner was so deep that one could hear the distant clink of a spoon forgotten inside a cup. The wind outside kept howling, but inside, the world seemed suspended, frozen in the moment the question echoed. "Who here is Selina Marquez?" The waitress felt her heart race. For an instant, she thought her feet wouldn't move. The entire dining room seemed to turn its gaze toward her, even the regulars who usually ignored her. Selina drew in a breath, clutched the key at her neck, and stepped forward. I'm her." The lead lawyer, a man with graying hair and a stern expression, consulted a few papers. Then he tilted his head slightly, as if recognizing someone far beyond appearances. "Miss Marquez, we are here on behalf of Jonathan Whitlow." The name struck her like lightning. Jonathan. The old man. The invisible figure with the worn coat and trembling hands. Her heart pounded, a mix of relief and disbelief. Is he all right?" she asked, barely above a whisper. The lawyer exchanged a glance with his colleagues, then turned back to her. "More than all right. Mr. Whitlow specifically requested that we come for you. He is not merely a lonely old man, as everyone thought. He is the founder of the Whitlow Foundation, a billion-dollar institution dedicated to educating underprivileged youth across the country." The diner erupted with a ripple of astonishment. Glasses clinked, someone dropped a fork. Selina brought her hand to her mouth, in disbelief. That doesn't make sense. I saw him, alone, freezing. He slept on old boxes in the back of this place. Her voice broke. He looked like he had nothing. The lawyer nodded. Looked like it. Because that was exactly what he wanted to show. Mr. Whitlow had grown weary of flattery and false friends. In recent months, he chose to disappear, to live as an ordinary man, almost invisible, to see who would still treat a human being with dignity. Selina felt her eyes fill with tears. The hidden slice of cake, the hot soup, the improvised blankets, each gesture seemed so small in the face of that revelation. And yet, it had been enough to change everything. Franklin, who had been watching with his arms crossed, couldn't hold back. Is this some kind of joke? That old man who took up a table without spending a dime, a billionaire? The lawyers turned to him. The youngest opened his folder and pulled out an envelope. According to Mr. Whitlow's instructions, we must record that the behavior of this establishment was carefully observed. And it will be taken into account in contracts and investments. Franklin went pale. Contracts? Investments? He stammered. Mr. Whitlow owns part of the properties in this city, including the building this diner operates in, another lawyer stated coldly. And he is currently in the process of reviewing leases. A sepulchral silence filled the dining room. The customers no longer looked at Selina, but at the manager, who now seemed smaller than ever, crushed under the weight of his own arrogance. He never told me anything, Franklin tried to argue, but his voice died in the air. The gray-haired lawyer turned back to Selina. Miss Marquez, Mr. Whitlow wishes for you to accept a position at the foundation. Director of a new educational institution, dedicated to young people who, like you, face hardships but never lose the ability to truly see others. The salary is worthy. Housing, guaranteed. Selina felt the ground slip beneath her. For an instant, she held onto the counter, as if she needed something solid to believe this was real. Me? A director? But I'm just a waitress. You are not just a waitress. The lawyer corrected firmly. You are a woman who, even with little, gave everything she had. And that is what the world lacks most. The tears she had held back finally streamed down her face, burning hotter than the icy wind outside. For the first time, she didn't hide them. The customers, who had once seen her only as part of the scenery, applauded quietly. It wasn't loud, but it was sincere, filled with the astonishment of witnessing justice being served before their very eyes. The manager, now shrunken, dared not speak again. His humiliation was already complete. Selina brought her hand to her chest, pressing her mother's key against her heart. She finally understood that the small object wasn't just a keepsake, it was a reminder that the most important doors aren't opened with metal and locks, but with gestures of kindness. She took a deep breath, looked at the lawyers, and spoke with a steady, though trembling, voice. If it's to help young people in need, as I once was, then I accept. Relief swept through the dining room. The lawyers nodded in unison. The security guards, discreetly, stepped back toward the door. It was as if destiny itself had entered in silence and, in silence, now turned to begin again. Selina wiped her tears and looked toward the corner where Jonathan used to sit. For an instant, she almost saw him there, smiling at her with that tired, kind expression. A smile that seemed to say, "You saw me when no one else would." In that moment, she understood that the revealed wealth, the title, the salary, none of it truly mattered. What mattered was that the promise she had made to her mother lived on, and now it would reach far more lives than she had ever imagined. The wind outside still blew, but it no longer felt hostile. Inside her, Selina felt a new flame, as if she had finally discovered that the key she carried had always been meant to open paths, not doors. And so, in the middle of a simple diner, before ordinary witnesses, a universal truth was revealed. That winter night, between a bowl of soup and a worn-out blanket, an entire destiny was changed forever. Stories like Selina's remind us that true wealth is not found in money, but in love and compassion. Share in the comments, what act of kindness has most marked your life? And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more emotional stories like this one.